Good evening, everyone. Today we are gonna discuss our basic ethical principles, namely is our stewardship, totality, double effect, cooperation, and solidarity. Now, ethical principles are used to guide our decision-making process, specifically on our values, and they are based on our values and morality. Now, when we say values, it refers to our individual personal experiences that helps us form or characterize who we are. When we say morality, it is the difference or knowing the difference between what is good and what is bad. Now, in the hospital or in the healthcare setting, there are tons of ethical dilemmas. Ethical dilemmas. Our ethical principles will guide us in making a decision regarding our ethical dilemmas. Okay? In each of our ethical principles, I will provide an example of our decision-making process. Okay? This will provide a foundation for ethical behavior in various contexts, but most specifically in the healthcare setting. First is stewardship. Stewardship involves responsible and sustainable management. Okay? In the healthcare practice class, one of our goals is to remain efficient and cost effective. Efficient and cost effective. That is the reason why stewardship helps us ensure the careful and ethical use of our resources, because resources are our essential stuff, no, that we use to provide our care, and specifically here in the Philippines, no, there is a constant need or a constant lack of resources. Okay? A constant lack of resources. Now, when we say stewardship, an example of stewardship is, for example, there is a patient. The patient expresses concerns about the cost of the medication. Okay? The patient expresses concerns about the cost of the medication. Okay? The nurse, as a good nurse or as a nurse who practices stewardship, the nurse can collaborate with the healthcare team to explore cost-effective alternatives. Okay? Cost-effective alternatives. Let's say, for example, our generic drugs. Those are very cost-effective because they are not marked up by what we call our pharmaceutical companies. Okay? That is an example of stewardship. Another example of stewardship is the use of what we call the use of resources in their proper and accurate way. We have discussed this before, no? The use of the principle of justice, diba? Justice. The people who need the resources or are prioritized to need the resources are supposed to be the people who will get the resources. Okay? Ensures the careful and most especially ethical use, which means our justice. Okay? Now, there are two types of stewardship. The first is environmental stewardship, which means the sustainable use of natural resources. When we say natural resources, we are referring to our mga yamang gubat, okay? Yamang gubat, or the treasures of the forest, so to speak. When we say treasure of the forest, these are our natural minerals, these are our crops, our trees. Those are our natural resources, okay? Now we are currently fighting a war against climate change, no, and we need to be environmentally steward about that. We need to be able to use sustainable methods of environmental protection. Now, a common abbreviation they use is reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. Class, I want you to remember this, class, when we are talking about reduce, reuse, and recycle. The first letter, the first word is reduce. The first word is reduce. What we mean by reduce is this. For example, instead of buying uh, um, a water bottle or a plastic water bottle, or water that comes in a plastic water bottle, we can opt for instead buying a pressurized or a vacuum sealed container para na to mga hydro flask. Why? When we are doing that, class, when we are doing that, we are reducing our waste by reducing our consumption of plastic water bottles. That's why reduce is the first. Similar to your ABCs in nursing, di ba? Airway, breathing, circulation. Our reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce is the first for a reason. Reduce is the priority. Reduce, reuse. Next is reuse. Reuse is very simple. It is basically what we call maintaining the status quo. For example, one of our main problems right now, I don't know if you know this, is e-waste. E-waste. E-waste or electronic waste. Like for example, our cell phones and our lithium-ion batteries. We are, once they are of use, no, we have the tendency to throw them away and they become e-waste. Now, here's the thing about e-waste. Here's the thing about electronics specifically. Electronics are easily reusable. You just need to find a use case. You just need to find how to use it. For example, maybe you have an iPhone 14. Okay? Fairly recent phone within the last few years, within the last year, diba? Fairly recent phone within the last 12 months lang. Okay? But you also have an iPhone 6. Okay? The tendency there is usually the iPhone 6, which is the older phone, which is the one that we do not use anymore. The tendency there is supposed to be there's a perception that it is unusable. Okay, because there is a problem with the battery or maybe a problem with the screen. Now it's very simple, guys. Instead of throwing it away, maybe you can find another use case for it. If the problem is only the battery, then maybe you can get it fixed. Okay, you can get it fixed. Maybe you can trade it in for what we call trade it in or give it to a recycling plant. Okay, but what we mean when we say recycle, no, is we should try to find a new use case for it or a new life for it. For example, you have an iPhone 6, diba? You have an iPhone 6. The problem is the battery life. The battery life, it does not last as long as you need it to be usable for the entire day. So maybe you can give it to a younger relative. Okay, as a starter phone. Another use case is maybe you can use it just for music. Okay? Maybe you can use it just for music. That is what we mean when we say reuse. Finding another use case for it. Okay? One of my favorite cases of reuse simply is the use of what we call our plastic vases. You know, plastic vases katong pag pandemic dagan kayo og nagplant. The good thing about planting, no, is even though kini siya, let's say for example this plant has already harvested or died, you can still reuse it for a next batch. That is another example of reusing. Okay? And lastly is our recycle. We already know what recycle is. It has been iterated as years go on, no. Our efforts to recycle is continuously growing, but supposed to be recycle should be the least priority because it is the last thing we need to do. If we cannot reduce our waste, then maybe we can reuse our waste. But if we cannot reuse our waste, then we can recycle our waste. That is a linear process. Okay? So that's why when we say recycle, it should be the last priority we should do. Our first priority should always be reduce. Now, sir, how is this relevant in the hospital? Okay, we already know what recycling is. Recycling is upusing or converting the use case of an item to another. One of my favorite examples of recycling is very nice. If you are knowledgeable in any sense about 3D printing, you know that there is a contraption that can turn, you know that there is a contraption that can turn your plastic water bottles into threads for 3D printing. Threads or spools. You can turn it into spools for 3D printing. So basically, you are 3D printing with the plastic bottles plastic. Oh, that is an amazing recycling effort, no? Because you are using something that's supposed to be waste and you are using it for something new. That is an amazing practice. Now, how does this relate to the healthcare profession? Healthcare, simple. In the healthcare profession, no, it is one of our main responsibilities is health teaching. Now, health teaching, environmental stewardship. When we are health teaching, specifically in the community, there is a tendency that one of the main problems in that community is waste management. Now, if you are well versed in our practice, no, if you are well versed in our practice, or maybe even if you are just a novice in our practice, you can infinitely tell, or you can immediately determine that waste or garbage can cause a lot of issues. Okay? A lot of health issues specifically. One example of that is our dengue. Okay? If there is a lot of waste, specifically kana mga pools of water or mga jugs or mga water containers of water, there is a high likelihood, specifically in our tropical country, the Philippines, there is a high likelihood that the Aedes aegypti mosquito that brings dengue will lay their eggs on the water. Okay? So that's what you need to do. As a nurse, you need to provide or you need to teach them how to properly manage their waste by cycling what we call, or by telling them what we call, reduce, reuse, recycle. Okay. Next is organizational stewardship. This is the responsible management of company assets. Okay, this is very obvious, specifically when you are working in the hospital. In the hospital class, we have a limited number of assets. Like for example, an ECG machine is an asset. An ECG machine is an asset. A room is an asset. Now, when we say responsible management of company assets, simple, same as the principle of justice, we are gonna use it for those who need it. Okay? You do not give or you do not use your ECG machine to a patient who does not have a heart problem. Okay? That is just wasteful. You're just wasting the company's time and money, and you are wasting the slot on the ECG machine. Okay? That is organizational stewardship. Cost effectiveness. Basically, class, when we say stewardship, it is efficiency and cost effectiveness. Providing alternatives. Okay. Next is totality. Totality considers the entirety of the individual in ethical decision making. Now, totality is basically holistic care. Holistic care. If you know something about holistic care, that is one of the main goals of nursing. Holistic care or total care in all aspects. It is important because it ensures a holistic approach taking into consideration the physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of the patient. Okay? Or the client. Diba? Mas preferred na to ang client. Okay? Now, in healthcare class, we consider the overall well-being of the patient. Obviously, we already know this, holistic care, di ba? When we are doing assessment, we are not only assessing their physical well-being, but also their emotional, psychological, psychosocial, and other types of well-being, spiritual even. That's why if you look at your manual class, in the part where there is what we call an interview, there is always a context summary or there is always a questionnaire regarding our spiritual aspect. Like for example, what is your religion? Okay, mental, there is also a mental aspect po, our nervous system or our neuro assessment, that is a mental aspect. Aside from that, there is also an emotional aspect. Like for example, our subjective cues. There are emotional aspects there, no? Now, if you are like me and you will consider education as one of your career paths, though, in education, totality is nurturing the intellectual and emotional development of students. Now, you already know the difference, or you already know IQ, correct? Intellectual quotient. Okay? It is a non-random number. It is a non-random number usually obtained by a standardized test. Non-random number usually obtained by a standardized test, from a standardized test, to determine your percentile of intelligence, of mental intelligence, against your peers. Okay? But we also have what we call emotional quotient, EQ. The problem with EQ is this: EQ is not easily determinable. Because if you know this, when we say emotions, class, emotions is a subjective thing. Okay? Something, let's say for example, graduating could make someone happy, or most people happy, but for others, maybe not. Maybe they do not want to graduate this course. That's what makes it subjective, because each approach is unique. Each emotional response is unique. Okay? That's what makes it difficult to assess. Now, why is this important? Let's say for example, if you consider a career in education. Simple. Here's how you do it. Okay? As a instructor, if you're gonna be an instructor soon, you have to take into consideration the totality of the students. Okay? You have to take into consideration, let's say for example, a student is struggling. You have to take into consideration why they are struggling. Because a struggle is not only an intellectual struggle. Maybe it is an emotional struggle. Maybe they are struggling in school because someone has died in their family. Okay? Someone has died in their family. That is a very hard thing to do, no? You cannot keep your focus if that is the case. Okay? So that is the main concept, no? But in totality, there is as an educator, no, you have to consider lots of aspects. Oh, maybe you can even include physical, no? An example of that is maybe the student is feeling unwell. Feeling unwell. They have been unwell, or they have been ill for the past few weeks, and maybe that's the reason why they are struggling in school. No, I actually have a example of that. No, but to disclose, no, how to tell you, I am not able to discuss the 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 specifics with you. But I have a student who recently withdrew his or her classes because they are suffering from a chronic disease, okay, that requires them to stop their education, no. So at first, no, I saw his or her grades were really high, because he or she was a really smart person, a really intelligent person. But as the semester went on, he or she had feelings, or had noticed the symptoms of the chronic disease, and it affected his or her education, or his or her learning process. Okay, totality. Next is double effect. Double effect, its actions may have both a good and bad effect. The principle focuses on the intent. Now, before we discuss the importance, I would like to give you an example of double effect. Okay? Let's say for example, class, in double effect, there is a patient. There is a patient who is dying. Now, there is a patient who is dying. Almost dead. Critical care. Now, let's say for example, there is a life-saving intervention. There is something you can do that can save their life. there is something you can do that can save their life. Now, but as a nurse, you know that this intervention has a major side effect. It has a major side effect. You know na it has a major side effect. Now, that is double effect. If you listen to my words correctly, there is a good effect. When we say the good effect, we mean it is a life-saving intervention that could possibly save the patient's life. But when we say the bad effect, it is the one wherein there is a side effect. Side effect. That is a good example no of double effect. But the principle focuses on intent. Even though there is a side effect that is bad, we might still need to continue doing it, or we might still need to give the intervention or the good effect, because the intent there is to save the life. Okay? The intent there is good, which means it is to save the life. Now, if the intent there is bad, simple, you do not do it. If the intent there is bad, do not do it. But if it is good, there is no reason why, even though there is a side effect, that we should not pursue. There is no reason we should not pursue the intervention. Okay? Another example of double effect is our, let's say for example, in hospice care. You know hospice care. Hospice care, similar to the previous situation, is critical care. Critical care. Now, in critical care class, you know that there is pain medication. There is pain medication specifically for patients who are suffering chronic pain. Chronic pain. The problem there is this, okay? Let's say, for example, you have a patient who is suffering from chronic pain. And then you give them pain relievers. You gave them pain relievers. Their pain was alleviated. Ang ilang pain nawala. Their pain was alleviated. But you know that there is a side effect that could possibly shorten their life. Okay? Will you still pursue the action? Now, take into consideration na the good effect there is that the pain will be alleviated. Mawala ang pain sa patient. The bad effect there is it might shorten their life. Our focus, as I've said, is the intent. Is our intent good? Yes, our intent is good. We want them to achieve comfort. Now, here's the thing about that. Here's the thing about my decision-making process. You have to also take into consideration the context of the patient. As I've said before, the patient is in hospice care or critical care, meaning they are almost dying. Now, during the patient's phase of death and dying, our main priority is comfort. And we will pursue comfort unless instructed by the patient, or unless the patient declines to receive the intervention. But in this instance, in this context, our focus is comfort. So that's why we will pursue the action, give the medication, even though it will shorten their life. Okay, so double effect provides ethical guidance when actions have mixed consequences. As I've said, no, there is a good and bad effect. It will provide us with ethical guidance. Now, the conditions must be met, and all conditions must be met. Okay, number one, the action itself must be morally good. For example, giving medication, is that good? Yes, that is beneficence or doing good. Okay, the agent intends only the good effect. Obviously, as a nurse, you only want, let's say for example, the patient to alleviate their pain. You do not want the patient to shorten their life. The key word there is intend. Our intent is directly correlated with our intent. If our intent is to kill, then that is wrong, then we do not pursue it. But if our intent is to alleviate the pain, then we pursue it, because the intent is good. And what we want from our action is the good effect. Okay. The good effects must outweigh the bad effect. That is the reason why we have to consider the context. That is the reason why we have to consider the context. If they are dead and dying, okay, the priority is obviously to alleviate the pain, to alleviate or to provide comfort. So go ahead, give the medication even though it might shorten their life, because the priority there is comfort anyways. But if they are younger, let's say for example, infant, and if there, let's say for example, there is a pain reliever that could pose a risk for another condition, are you gonna give it? No, you do not. You will pursue other actions. Now, and lastly, class, as I've said, all conditions must be met. Um, there is no alternative course of action. Okay? There is no alternative course of action. If there is no alternatives of what we should do, then that is when our decision making takes over. Our double effect decision making takes over. Next is cooperation. Cooperation is the ethical principle related to working together for a common purpose. Now, in the healthcare setting, class, our common purpose is to, number one, prevent illness. Number two, restore health. And number three, maintain health. Number one, prevent illness. Number two, restore health. And number three, maintain health. Maintain is the key word. Maintain. Okay, cooperation. It is it is working together for a common purpose. Okay. It encourages collaboration while maintaining ethical standards, no? We've already talked about this before in the healthcare setting. Collaboration is essential. No person in the healthcare space is an island. Okay? Eventually, you will need help. Okay? Because not everyone knows everything. Because no one knows everything. No one is capable of doing everything. You will need help. Okay? And the ethical principle of cooperation allows us not to think past our biases against our colleagues and cooperate with them. Okay, there are three types. First is material cooperation. When we say material cooperation, it is direct assistance. It is when you actually or directly assist someone. For example, a nurse wants help or ask for your help regarding the turning of the patient to prevent bed sores. When you go directly to the patient and you turn the patient yourself, that is what we mean when we say direct assistance or material cooperation. Okay, material cooperation. Now, when we say formal cooperation, it is shared intent. When we say shared intent, this is one of the most common things. This is the most common thing in the healthcare profession. No, our intention in the hospital is to, number one, prevent illness. Number two, restore health. Number three, maintain health. Diba? So that is our shared intent. Our intention is to do those three things. Diba? So it's very self-explanatory. Okay, self-explanatory. Next is our what we call immediate cooperation. Immediate cooperation. Now, immediate cooperation is special. Immediate cooperation is special because it is simultaneous. When we say simultaneous, it is what we call spontaneous, no? Spontaneous. It is mostly spontaneous. Like let's say for example, there is a patient, or there is a person who fell down. No. Who passed out in the bus station. Okay? Simultaneous actions, ha? Who passed out in the bus station. Now, as a nurse, your instinct will kick in and you will immediately help. Other people around you will immediately help. Okay? The intent there is to care for or to treat the person who is unconscious. Okay? But nothing triggered you, or no one told you to do it. It was just instinctual. That is what we mean when we say immediate cooperation. Like for example, you in the hospital, someone fell down while walking in front of the nurses. Immediately, the first action or the first thing you do, the first instinct you do is you try to help the patient. Okay, that is that is uh that is very specific, no, that is very specific, that is it's very spontaneous, very spontaneous. Next is solidarity. Solidarity is unity and mutual support within a group or among different groups. Okay, unity is mutual support within a group or among different groups. The importance there is it strengthens social bonds and fosters a sense of collective responsibility. That is the key word there, collective responsibility. Because in the hospital class, okay, even though liability is shared, okay, there should be a sense of collective responsibility. Um, no, one of the main examples for solidarity is the healthcare team. No, if a healthcare team works collectively to address the social determinants of health that impact their population, no, so the entire healthcare team, they will try to work collectively or as a solidarity, and it is their responsibility to collectively address the social determinants, no, or the social problems of health that can impact the patients specifically in a community. Okay, that is what we mean by solidarity. Now, there are two types of solidarity. Number one is social solidarity, which is support for the marginalized communities. Marginalized communities. Like, for example, class, as a community health nurse, or when you go on duty in the community health nurse, you are collectively responsible. You are collectively responsible for what we call collectively responsible for what we call the assessment, the diagnosis, the planning, implementation, and evaluation or a nursing process for the entire community. That's what, as I've said, no, in a previous example, no, one of your main priorities in the community is to assess whether or not there is a health problem in the community, in that community. Okay, when we say marginalized, no, this is very specific. Let's say, for example, you're trying to help those who are affected with STDs or HIV. You are trying to help those affected with poverty. Maybe you're trying to help the communities which are affected with let's say, for example, a typhoon, or this specific community. Maybe even not a problem. Maybe even your marginalized community could be pregnant women. Okay, most of the time, no, as a nurse, no, you can always see a problem. Now, the good thing there is you actually have the responsibility, or more specifically, the collective responsibility. All of you have the collective responsibility to do what is right. Okay. Next is global solidarity or international aid and cooperation. This is most common specifically when there is a disaster, no, or maybe even war, no. Like for example, in the Ukraine war, there was an international cooperation between the allies of Ukraine to immediately help them in their war efforts. No, but that is a very it is a very negative topic. We do not want to talk about war, no. So instead, maybe we could talk about something a little bit more positive. Let's say, for example, na ay typhoon. See, for example, typhoon Yolanda. If you're even old enough to remember typhoon Yolanda, no. it was very strong, specifically in Leyte. That's very strong. Now, what the thing about I liked about it was there was obvious global solidarity. The first, once the news came out that the area was heavily affected, international aid came to the rescue. International aid came to the rescue. Okay, that there were lots of donations coming in from different countries all across the world, and you actually felt that there was a cooperation between the countries involved. Okay. And lastly, class, is how we make our ethical decisions or ethical decision making. Okay. Basic ethical principles often intersect in decision making. When we say intersect, they are often involved in our decision making. Now, how do we make an ethical decision? First is, remember this is a prioritization. This is going down. This is a sequence. First is identify the issue. Identify the issue. Okay. There is a problem. Normally, we can diagnose it. We can find it immediately right away. It is very obvious, specifically if the problem is a very prominent problem in your community or your workplace. Okay. Next is gather information. Gather information similar to your assessment. You will try to find data that can help prove or disprove your problem. Okay? It can help either prove or disprove your problem. That is what we mean when we say gather information. There's lots of methods to gather information. One of them is observation. Another is interviewing. Very similar to how you do assessment. Okay? Next is to consider the ethical principles. So you have to go back to our ethical principles to see if it lines up with our problem. Okay? To see if it lines up with our problem. After that is we evaluate our options. When we say evaluate our options, class, when we say evaluate options, we must make sure that our options are all we have scoured all the options. We have tried to we have exhausted all the options before proceeding with making a decision. Okay? Before we make a decision, we must have exhausted or used up or maybe considered all other options. Okay? Then we can make a decision. Once we consider the ethical principles, once we have identified the issue, gathered information, considered the ethical principles, and evaluated the alternatives or options, then we can all add it up to make a decision. Now, I remember, class, this will be further explained during your leadership and management class during your 4th year. The reason for that is this. Your leadership management will involve lots of decision making, specifically when it comes to conflict resolution, because most of the time, these ones involve conflict resolution. And lastly, class, you have to reflect on the decision. When we say reflect on the decision, class, we have to evaluate, similar to your advice, evaluate whether or not our decision was sound, our decision was appropriate. If the decision was found to not be appropriate or the problem keeps on persisting, and then we have to go back to step 1. We have to do or identify the issue again. Okay? Now, that's it for your assignment. Okay. Please provide an example situation for the 5 basic ethical principles. The 5 basic ethical principles. Okay? Minimum 5 sentences each. This is your final assignment. You can put this in a one bond paper, A4. The deadline for this is Wednesday next week. Okay. Ayan. Now, aside from that, no, aside from providing an example situation, no, I want you to put on the side, maybe on the bottom or below the situation you have provided, how you as a nurse would handle it. How you as a nurse would handle it. Okay. Yes. Ay. And lastly, this assignment, before I forget, this assignment is by pair. By pair. So you can look for a partner and you can do this yourself as a pair.